Welcome to Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. In this presentation, we will be reviewing chapters 13 through 15. After Nat Turner's rebellion, there were questions raised as to how to keep slaves happier and under better control. One option decided on was to offer church services for the slaves. These services would be kept separate from the services offered for the whites, and the most suitable meeting place found was a free colored man's home as opposed to a church building. Sermons focused on condemnation, obedience, and behavior, condemning the slaves as sinners, that the Bible calls them to be obedient to their masters, and how they were expected to behave in general from a spiritual standpoint. Eventually, the original clergyman moved on to a place where he could make more money, and a new clergyman took his place, bringing positive change. His wife taught reading and writing to the slaves. Meetings were moved to an actual church setting, and sermons were kinder and simpler, geared more toward life issues of the slave. Even this brought discourse when complaints were made that the sermons for the blacks were better than the ones for the whites. This clergyman, too, moved on, leaving blacks with many questions about Christianity, such as there were missionaries who traveled the world to help the needy, but what about the needy at home? What did preachers really know of the life of a slave, and how could they speak to something they know nothing about? And why is Christianity so different from religion in the South when the Bible says that Jesus is not a respecter of men? In chapter 14, Harriet gives birth to two children. In an attempt to shame and control her, her master threatens to take her children away, throws her down a flight of stairs, and eventually cuts off all of her hair. On a Sunday, when her master was away, Harriet took the children to a baptism service. While there, she reflected on how different her mother's life had been from hers. She was married and had what legal rights were available to slaves at the time. Her master died when she was a child, and her mistress raised her, and she never had a master to lord power over her. Therefore, she presented Harriet for baptism without shame. In chapter 15, the persecution continues as Harriet's master looked forward to her children being grown so that he could sell them. However, Harriet vowed to herself that she would rather see her children dead than under his power. In order to control her, her master refused to sell her or her children for any amount of money. He accused her as a jealous lover would, and at one point, in a rage, he threw her child across the room and refused her to go to him. A confrontation between Harriet's grandmother and master brings them a much-needed break from his visits when the grandmother witnesses him beating Harriet and orders him to leave her house. She refutes his accusations and advises him to pray for his soul. He points out that he has the power over them and leaves, not returning for months. He returns in the spring with an offer for her freedom based on 3 stipulations. She was to have no contact with the children's father, she and her children would live in a cottage owned by him, and she would only have light labor such as sewing. She refused his offer and was presented with the alternative. She would be sent to the plantation of her young master. Her son would be put to work and then sold, and her daughter would be raised and eventually sold for even more money than her son. Her grandmother begged her to accept the offer, but Harriet knew she would still be at his mercy, and she was determined to make a better way for her and her children.